Japan, the safety levels are on the order of the natural background. So they're
Hmm.
spending hundreds of billions of dollars equivalent to scrape the topsoil off of the surroundings of Fukushima and store them all in garbage bags. And this is a horrible thing for people driving around, gathering fear, seeing these mounds of
Yeah,
earth
totally agree.
stacked up. Are these safety levels reasonable? Is what Japan is doing reasonable and necessary?
I don't think it's strictly necessary. I mean, I have a lot of concerns over about the decontamination that has gone on, and this obsession. I think it is partly a Japanese obsession with being clean. And
Mm.
so if something is contaminated, they need to clean it up. And that's a cultural issue as much as anything else. But the problem with skimming topsoil, of course, is that area of Japan is where they used to grow an awful lot of their rice. Fukushima rice was, the best rice in Japan. And of course, if you take away the topsoil, you actually damage all the agriculture as well. And that topsoil takes many, many years to replace. So you're also doing further damage to the economy. There's the psychological, viewpoint of this stuff is stuck there. It's really dangerous. It's being taken away from us. Therefore, we must be really scared of it. There's also the economic damage you then do because you're actually making the ground for future generations much worse because you've taken all the good topsoil away. So there's all of those issues. And I think this is where I have a real bugbear with regulators and things like that, is if you look at one risk and that is all you focus on, and you're not aware of other risks that you might be generating by your actions to minimize that one risk, you can actually make things an awful lot worse for people. And I think that is our problem with radiation. We are focused on this nightmare of it might give us cancer, and that is all we think about. We don't think about how our actions will affect other people around us, will affect future generations, and will affect the future economy. And all of those, as we've seen through the COVID pandemic, when your economy starts coming into problems and people start losing their jobs, there are mental pressures and all sorts of things. And that's exactly what we have seen in Japan. The disruption of society and community that went on through the evacuation has caused huge health problems. Nothing to do with the radiation. The radiation, and I've said this many times, the radiation did not kill anybody and it will not kill anybody. The problem is that our actions that we have taken, because we're so scared of the radiation, has actually killed an awful lot of people. About 1,700 people died as a result of a very hurried evacuation. Now, it's difficult to say that that should never have happened because this was not just a nuclear accident. There was also an earthquake and a tsunami to think about. So there may well have been other reasons why those people had to be evacuated. But I think it was done in a rush without proper medical support in some cases, simply because people were running away because they were scared of the radiation. Yet we know from good studies in Japan that if you actually did the same procedure, but with the appropriate support, people didn't die. So our emergency response to it to run away killed more people than the radiation ever would have done. And it's still causing people an awful lot of stress out there. A lot of people are still worried that they're going to suffer the consequences of being exposed to radiation when we know now that the doses were so low that we're never going to see anything.
Indeed. I mean, so this is really interesting, and I think that the rational public policy aspect is important to me, and that's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is that public policy just isn't rational.
No.
We need to get the rational voices out there so that this doesn't keep happening.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
funny enough, we actually published a paper. It was all written and sewn up and gone to the publishers before Fukushima happened. To mark the 25th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident, we published a big review in one of the clinical journals. And we'd said in the editorial there, the thing we did not learn from Chernobyl was how to communicate effectively the risk from radiation exposure. And then a month before that was actually due to hit the newsstands, Fukushima happened, and you just felt, oh God, we're going through all of this again. We're going to make all the same mistakes, and it was painful watching us make all the same mistakes again.
yeah, the public reaction has been problematic to say the least in terms of governments shutting down their nuclear
Yeah,
fleets and building up coal. And the amount of deaths as a result of the changes in energy policy are staggering.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, again, it's the focus on that one single fear of radiation and looking at that risk only, and not being aware that if you open more coal plants, you're going to increase air pollution, which we know kills people. If and then you've got the issues of climate change. And I'm not one of these people who believes that everybody's going to die as a result of climate change, but there will be significant environmental changes which will impact on public health. So you have to consider all of these things. You shouldn't be considering one risk on its own. You should be taking, as we do in medicine, we take an idea of the risk in the round. I mean, nobody would offer themselves for an operation if you didn't believe that was going to be the best thing for you. But there are risks in having an operation. But we know the way operations are performed and the people who do them are appropriately skilled, and therefore we minimize all those risks. And we can do the same thing with nuclear power. In fact, nuclear power is the safest way to produce energy. But you wouldn't believe that if you Googled it. A lot of the time, it's the science takes so long to do to get results that we're confident with, especially when you're looking at cancer studies after radiation exposure. We need 20, 30, 40 years worth of data. So somebody else can say whatever opinion they have in that 20, 30, 40 years, but you as a scientist can't come out and say, well, no, we do know the answer, because it takes 20 to 30 years to get there. So you're always on the back foot and always having to defend the science. Whereas I think now, with the results from the lifespan study in Japan that you quoted earlier, which actually another thing that people misunderstand about that is they think it's all high dose. It's not. Nearly half of that cohort had less than 5 millisieverts, which is equivalent to 2 years living in Britain, for example, from the radiation dose. A lot of the population that survived the initial blast had quite low levels of exposure. So we've got that low dose study. We've got Chernobyl, which actually for most of the time is a low dose study, if you're looking at the population rather than the workers themselves. And we've had 35 years after Chernobyl, and we've had nearly 70 years after the Japan bombs. So we have massive amount of data now. So we should be looking at it and saying, actually, we got this wrong. This is not as dangerous as we think it is. And I think people are starting to do that. But it was only after Fukushima that I think the scientists woke up and said, we have to do something about this, because actually what's being reported in the media is not correct.
Yes. Even just this morning on CBC and Canadian radio, they were doing a retrospective of the Fukushima disaster, and the announcer said 20,000 people were killed by the meltdowns in Fukushima on national radio. It's like, no.
I was just listening to our BBC News, and there was a report by Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, who I know very well, and I've actually been around the Fukushima area with him. And a lovely report, talked mainly about the tsunami, but the introduction by the newscaster was, the tsunami and the earthquake and the nuclear accident or nuclear disaster. And they keep using the term disaster. I don't use the term disaster. It's an accident. We made it a disaster. But, it was the inference was that there were, tens of thousands killed by the accident at Fukushima. No, the tsunami killed 20,000 people. And it does, I know Japan very well. I spent a lot of time in Japan. And it irks me that when you think of March the 11th, the first thing people think about is Fukushima, which didn't kill anybody, which will not kill anybody. And they forget about the 20,000 people who died as a result of the tsunami. And I just, I feel so sad, because that's the real tragedy.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.